Thưa Ngài Thủ tướng, thưa các bạn phóng viên Ấn Độ và Việt Nam thân mến, đoàn đại biểu cấp cao của Nhà nước Cộng hòa xã hội chủ nghĩa Việt Nam, chúng tôi hết sức vui mừng đến thăm cấp nhà nước trong chuyến đầu tiên của tôi
to India for the first time for myself as the State President of Vietnam. Your country is so beautiful and hospitable, and the time of the visit coincides with the Holi festival of India. May I take that opportunity on behalf of the high-level delegation of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, extend to the leaders and people of India the best wishes and regards on the occasion of the Holi festival. I would also like to express my sincere gratitude to Mr. Prime Minister, to the President, to the leaders of India for the warm hospitality and reception like brothers and sisters. Ladies and gentlemen, Prime Minister Modi and I have just concluded sincere, open and candid talks about bilateral relations as well as regional and global issues of mutual interest. We agree that the Vietnam-India Comprehensive Strategic Partnership has been flourishing with increasingly enhanced mutual trust and shared common interests. We reiterate our high commitment and political will to further deepening bilateral ties, meeting the desire of the two countries' leaders and people. On that note, we have discussed and agreed on the major guidelines for the bilateral relations in the coming years and set out concrete measures to remove obstacles and boost cooperation in various areas. I wish to touch upon some main points as follows. On political and diplomatic ties, both countries will step up exchange of high-level delegations and visits at all levels, strengthen party, state, government and parliamentary cooperation, and deepen people-to-people exchange. With that, I have kindly extended invitations to the President, to the Prime Minister and leaders of the Lok Sabha and Raja Sabha to make official visits to Vietnam, and also Chief Ministers of States to visit Vietnam under the Privileged Guest Program. On security defense, both sides continue to promote the sound cooperation in such areas as English language teaching, capacity building training, concession of credit, UN peacekeeping operation, maintain effective defense security dialogues while considering expanding cooperation in other potential areas. Both sides also agreed to work closely to address the regional security challenges, including maritime security and cyber security. On economic, trade, investment, the two sides will make joint efforts to harness the potentials and comparative advantages of each side, limit trade barriers, facilitate export, striving to bring two-way trade to $15 billion by 2020. We are committed to creating favorable conditions for the two countries' businesses, especially in areas of energy, renewable energy, infrastructure, education, information technology, etc. With incentives, we are committed to improving the two-way investment. We highly value the projects, including joint oil and gas exploration in the continental shelf of Vietnam, wind power, solar power projects, and the possibility of establishing Indian government and textile parks in Vietnam. On transportation connectivity, we welcome Vietjet Air Vietnam to open direct flights connecting Ho Chi Minh City and New Delhi on this occasion, and encourage Indian airlines to promptly open flights to Vietnam. On development cooperation and training cooperation, Vietnam welcomes and looks forward to India's continued technical, technological, and financial assistance in such breakthrough areas such as infrastructure, human resources, science technology, building research and development capacity for Vietnam, particularly in biotechnology, medical technology, applied sciences, increase long-term scholarships for Vietnamese students to study at renowned Indian universities, and support opening of vocational training centers in Vietnam. On cultural tourism and people-to-people exchanges, both sides agree that Vietnam and India have time-honored traditional religious linkages, which serve as the foundation for breakthroughs in the cultural tourism cooperation between the two countries. With that, we will continue to step up implementation of the projects for conservation and maintenance of the mid-turn century sponsored by India, facilitate tourism promotion events in each country, and strive to significantly raise the number of tourists. In addition, both sides will intensify the people-to-people diplomacy activities following up to the commemorative events during the Friendship Year 2017. As for cooperation at the multilateral forums, both sides will continue to work together closely and exchange mutual support at multilateral forums, particularly within the framework of the United Nations. We reaffirm our close collaboration to support India to further its relations and multifaceted connectivity with ASEAN, attaching high importance to the maintenance of security, maritime safety and freedom of navigation and overflight, settlement of disputes by peaceful means on the basis of the international law, including the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea 1982, and fully respect the diplomatic and legal processes. On this occasion, we welcome relevant authorities from both countries for signing a number of agreements, and we agree to task relevant ministries and agencies to take active measures to implement these documents. I firmly believe that given the strong commitment by our leaders and people and the joint efforts made by ministries, agencies and localities on both sides, the Vietnam-India Comprehensive Strategic Partnership will continue to be strengthened and deepened with higher productivity in the interest of both peoples, contributing to peace, stability and development in the region and the world. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, and you all.
Mr. President, thank you all for joining.
All right, so that was India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi and also the Vietnamese President Quang. They're addressing a joint press conference, reiterating on a number of commonalities and also several other issues on which India and Vietnam can, of course, extend their cooperation. Several memorandums of understanding, of course, will be signed between the two nations in terms of defense, in terms of trade, in terms of other aspects, and also considering the fact that Vietnam is geostrategically an extremely significant nation, and India has been pushing forth in a very concerted way in the Look East policy. So this of course, is a crucial relationship. for India and also for Vietnam, and also considering what has been playing out in the region in recent times. This in many ways could define the relationship in Southeast Asia. I'll be joined by my colleague Ramesh Ramachandran in just a bit, but this is what has been said by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who reiterated the long-standing historical and cultural commonalities between the two nations, and also what can be achieved in terms of greater trade and commerce cooperation between the two nations. It's of course an interesting time that this visit has of course come. And now I'm told that we are joined in by my colleague Ramesh Ramachandran from our international desk. Ramesh, this is an interesting sort of a press conference that was held. There were several issues that the two leaders in fact touched upon. Defence was one of them, and also expanding trade between the two nations, something which has not been tapped to its full potential.
Absolutely. The President of Vietnam is still addressing the media as we speak, but both sides have just concluded the signing of 3 agreements, including one in the field of cooperation in civil nuclear energy. Remember, Vietnam is very keen on Indian assistance in setting up nuclear reactors in Vietnam and in furthering that cooperation between the two countries. So that was one of the 3 agreements signed on the occasion of the conclusion of the delegation-level talks between the President of Vietnam and the Prime Minister of India. And Mr. Modi, in his joint press statement, mentioning about defense and security cooperation in particular, saying that both countries want to graduate to co-production and co-development of weapons systems and platforms, including in the areas of space and defense cooperation, and also on energy cooperation, where he said that India is looking for trilateral cooperation among India, Vietnam and like-minded countries in energy, oil and gas cooperation, exploration in Vietnam as well.
Absolutely indeed. And what was left unsaid in that exploration for oil resources in that very, very rich South China Sea region, because this of course has been the region of contention between several of the ASEAN nations and also China. China has been extremely assertive, and Vietnam is one of those few nations, although tiny in terms of its abilities, something which is a nation which has stood up to China in a very hard manner. So can we expect greater cooperation between India and Vietnam on that front?
Absolutely. Remember, India has been engaged in Vietnam in oil and gas exploration since 1988. So India is not a new entrant in the oil and gas sector in Vietnam. But that said, of late, India is looking to step up its engagement in Vietnam. And as the Vietnamese ambassador told WION just a couple of days ago, that they are looking forward to greater Indian investments in oil and gas in their exclusive economic zone, or EEZ. Now, that said, Vietnam, as you mentioned, Mohammed, has overlapping maritime security or maritime boundary claims with China in the South China Sea. And that issue was also discussed in the bilateral talks here in New Delhi between the President of Vietnam and the Prime Minister of India. And in the Prime Minister Modi, for his part, in reiterating that India is for an open Indo-Pacific architecture, meaning thereby that the Chinese increasing influence and aggression in the South China Sea is not to the liking of India, Vietnam and many other countries in the region as well.
And also, how do you view this being seen by China in the context of the South China Sea? Vietnam is one of those nations that is standing up to the Chinese. India, of course, has made its point very, very clear that any sort of belligerence is something that India would not tolerate. This is along the border with India. But also, in terms of the support it is lending to the nations in Southeast, in the South China Sea region, especially in the case of Vietnam.
If you look at the regional security architecture, Mohammed, Vietnam is one of those few countries that are actually standing up to China and Chinese bullying, the so-called Chinese bullying in the region. Remember, Vietnamese ambassadors told WION recently that on the issue of South China Sea, while ASEAN and China have agreed to evolve a code of conduct. Now, that's up for negotiation still, but Vietnam is hopeful that something good will come out of it towards the end of the negotiations for a code of conduct. But until then, they seek to remain engaged with China. And as Ambassador mentioned to us not so long ago, that China is an important neighbor for Vietnam, no doubt, but they are remaining engaged and hoping for a fruitful outcome from the code of conduct talks. On the issue of One Belt, One Road initiative, Mohammed, Vietnamese ambassadors told WION that they are still studying the proposal and that they are cautiously moving ahead with studying and perusing the implications of the Belt and Road initiative, which, by the way, is a flagship enterprise of President Xi Jinping of China.